helping make this make this possible. So that's Microsoft, AWS, CodeSmart, OUBT, the Olympia University of Business and Technology, and the Project Management Institute Olympia chapter. So thank you very much to our sponsors for helping us to do these programs. And we're also very interested in hearing from anyone who'd like to get involved with this group and help us figure out what we should focus on, what would be interesting to people. If you're interested in getting involved, we'll have contact information shown later, but very, very interested in hearing from anyone who wants to get involved. So without further ado, Bill Wyatt is the Chief Information Officer and Chief Information Security Officer for the Georgia Office of the State Treasurer, where he is responsible for IT operations and protection of over $50 billion in assets. So Bill, thank you very much for agreeing to speak with us today. The Georgia Treasurer's Office recently completed a significant project with cloud infrastructure, and so we'll hear how they improved security, reduced cost, enabled better remote work, and lots of great stuff like that. So thanks. Go ahead, Bill Wyatt.
Well, thanks for having me, Dr. Stanford. Appreciate it. And just hopeful I can provide some insight to the journey we had to where we are now. I mean, we've come a long way. We were a traditional data center, servers, kind of the way it was. If you guys have been around since 80s and 90s and 2000s, you're very much familiar with a typical environment. I started out with the state auditor's office back in 1999 and did a lot of different roles there. Did IT audit, IT security, and different things, and moved into Treasury here since 2015. But it's been a great time. And so regarding our journey, I know we had a few different kind of points that were potentially helpful to kind of guide this conversation. And so one of the things that I'll start with is kind of the initial mandate to increase accessibility and flexibility for remote work, and kind of how we accomplished that. So that being the question, there are several things that kind of contributed to us, making progress and these gains. First was, we always have to have the leadership buy-in to help remove the obstacles. That went very well. Just have really good support here with the state treasurer. Without that, none of this would have happened. So I know that's true probably for anywhere, but it was very important. We had various obstacles. We were connected into the state structure as a whole, and the way that was working did not allow for the flexibility that we needed to be able to really add the security and components we needed. So we went into our own tenant. And after that, it basically took off. We were able to do a lot once we made that transition. But in order to kind of meet those goals, we settled on the Microsoft framework, the Teams, the Azure side. We were early adopters into a lot of that space in hopes of also minimizing any issues with supply chain issues and concerns and risk related to those sort of things. And so our goal was to try to get as much as we possibly could get under that Microsoft umbrella. And we do have a lot of DR options in case there is something that goes awry with the Microsoft side. But everyone has a few issues here and there on occasion, I would imagine. But overall, we've been very solid and stable. Our staff requires high availability for their day-to-day work. And so it's really important that as an IT shop, we're able to give them the support, the tools, and all the different things to be able to accomplish that. And while addressing all the concerns with and the risk around ransomware, the other threats that are out there, obviously, there are quite a few, and those continue to grow pretty extensively. So we moved in that space. It took some time because we were kind of on the edge with Microsoft as Azure was evolving and maturing. If we went into it today, it would be much faster. I think a much cleaner, simpler implementation compared to kind of doing it while they were growing and stuff. But we got into the Azure side. We got our ecosystem built out. We utilized what was called the Microsoft Foundations, which is kind of a secure architecture to allow for implementing servers and infrastructure in a very secure manner. That went really well. We started dabbling in the Windows virtual desktop, trying to figure that out early on. Ultimately, when I'm kind of jumping around here a little bit, but when COVID hit, we had already been in that space, and so it really helped us transition. We shut down on a Thursday, and Monday, everybody was back into work remotely in the virtual desktop environment. We had also started the Teams implementation. We had made a fair amount of progress with Teams. Some of our motivations there were related to SMB shares and file shares, which are related to, the traditional, when you log on to your computers and stuff, you see your map drives and all that, where from an attack perspective of vulnerabilities and different things of that nature, you've got to worry about, the ransomware and files being grabbed off of those spaces. And so was always a concern. And so moving into Teams, trying to mitigate and get rid of those avenues for concern and risk was big on our plate. So we definitely made progress there. Probably some of our bigger challenges in that space was just user adoption. But I have to say that one of the positive things that came out of COVID was user adoption. When they went home, they were very quick to accept change, very more open to change. And that allowed for us to take a lot of work effort that had been going on for a while and building up to potential remote work capability. It advanced that significantly and allowed users to pretty much start work the next week without any hiccups from our side, because we had been doing a lot of work already. Any questions so far? I know that there's a lot of different things here.
So could you talk a little bit more about, you mentioned at the beginning, the leadership buy-in. Would you say that this was something driven by leadership, or leadership was won over and convinced?
Yeah.
Or was it some combination?
Yeah, it's a combination. So the treasurer here is very concerned about security. He's always been that way. He goes to the nth degree of what can go wrong. And so with that as a foundation, we know as an IT group, we've got a lot we need to do to make sure that we're covering all those bases. So we had a lot of support in that sense. And so it really helped us, make progress down that road to the different opportunities. And then as we continued, the governor had several executive orders expecting certain changes. In more recent times, it's, the mandate to go to cloud, which, again, saves costs and other things of that nature. Just addressing various other compliance type issues where, and if you think about it, and having grown up in data centers for 25 years, in the early years, it was difficult to, really get all the coverage that one might need to be fully compliant. When you're looking at a NIST framework 853, which is what Georgia follows, there's just a lot that's got to be done to have that level of certification. And it is expensive. It's hard to have the skills to do it, even recognize what needs to be done. Having been in an auditor role and looking at different agencies, there's a huge need for that. Just basic awareness of what you need to do. And then the other side is actually getting it done and the cost to do it. So the cloud ecosystem, like with Microsoft, they're spending over $1 billion a year in just compliance alone. So, when you get into that environment, you're going to inherit a lot of the things that, frankly, most places aren't even doing, but they really should be doing. And so that went a long way, not necessarily from a cost perspective, which, saves a lot, but it just covers those things that need to be handled. especially nowadays when it comes to, if you're looking at cyber policies with insurance providers, that world is growing significantly. Their awareness of what needs to be done is growing significantly. We meet with them on occasion, so we have our pulse on that side of things, whether it's issues or cyber policies. There's just a lot happening there. So there's a lot of pressure, and it's continuing to grow to be able to, have a maturity that's going to be affordable. So not being mature gets expensive, a lot more in that space, specifically with insurance providers. And obviously the more obvious day-to-day things like just having, being compromised or different issues that may come up, obviously those are costly. So there's a lot of reasons and a lot of motivation to make progress. And so that's been a large part while we've been doing it.
That makes sense. You talked a little bit about the kind of the user adoption side of things, and it sounds like that really ties into the security aspect as well. That a lot of the security improvement you get in going to the cloud tools really has a big impact on the way people are using the systems and collaborating. And that's, so it's kind of part and parcel. You get the additional flexibility and remote access with better security, but the kind of the downside is that people have to learn new ways to collaborate. And so you mentioned that was a bit of an issue. Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So, users could be in their groove. They like the way they do things. They don't want to change sometimes. But at the end of the day, we all know, well, we don't necessarily all know, but a lot know and realize that there's a lot that needs to be done to further secure. And so you're trying to bridge that gap from the user side to get them to adopt and, not put all these roadblocks up, and that goes up to their managers and whatnot. And so, we spend a lot of time with power users within divisions, trying to get them exposure, listening to their concerns and different things that they do day to day to make sure, things are changing all the time. So, well, around here anyway. So as people are doing different things, it's helpful for the IT team to understand really what they're dealing with and how they're going to interact and integrate with a new way of doing things. And so we spend a lot of time with the users, and that helped a lot. With those power users, spending time with their other users, explaining how it can work. So it was very helpful in that side. But you have to really, at some point, it was difficult before COVID. I wasn't really sure how I was going to get users to fully get over there without leadership really pushing hard. And some of the leadership themselves were in their grooves, and they're busy. It's to take time away from the day-to-day to spend learning something significantly new was just not an appetite for. So COVID helped us in that space. So we're very fortunate there because they had no choice at that point. But we were already doing, we just, from an IT side of things, we're just going forward in the background, underneath kind of thing, getting stuff structured and things in place for that more remote work friendly type atmosphere, which was another part of the governor's executive order as well, to get more postured that way. And our office has, again, high availability. So we have to have certain mechanisms in place, capabilities to be able to continue work. In the past, it was snow days, which we don't get a lot of. So down here in the South, a little ice comes along. It's, we don't have the infrastructure for that very well, right? It shuts us down. So people have to stay at home, but people still need paychecks coming in. Hundreds of millions of dollars can go out at any day just to make payroll, and our people do that moving of the money so that every teacher in the state gets paid. So there's a lot of things that have to happen. So we don't have the luxury of just taking a day off. So those sort of things and the environment kind of helps push also users to basically get more involved, even though they're busy. When you're a smaller group and everybody's needed, and are professionals in their space, they don't have a lot of free time to explore around. So, but we push hard to have conversations and interact with the users, do presentations. We had Microsoft come on site to do some presentations outside of us in our space here, and that was helpful. In Teams, we were there when Teams was still coming out of the box kind of thing, and there's a lot that now that's come so far compared to where it was. So there's so many more opportunities that if existed back then, I think would have been even easier. But we got through that. We got the data moved over, and then users start seeing the benefits like collaborating on documents, not having to deal with locked files. There's all those kind of issues that were always there, and it created a linear path to getting work done versus a parallel path. Users having to wait for the next person to get out of the file before they can get in and start doing their work. So it created the ability to do collaborating on files and documents. The auditing on those files were significant and helpful. Recovery improved significantly. High availability. Again, we're already that space, but going into the Microsoft side, Azure, Teams, we have a couple outside solutions that we use for additional coverage. Implemented those technologies, and it's managing users' needs and issues have gotten much better than they were, say, 5 years ago. We've lowered costs as a result. We've eliminated when we moved to Azure regarding servers and the infrastructure components. In the past few years, we've been able to remove all of our domain controllers. So from a security side, right, you're gaining the benefits of just being Azure Active Directory only. It's taken some time, we domain services as well, but we're able to eliminate, 8 servers right off the bat, right? So those things cost, whether you're hosting them on-prem or in the cloud. So cost savings we've seen, ability to eliminate other services was helpful as well. Again, from the cost savings perspective. But again, from the user side of things, they are seeing the benefits of just, things are running faster. They're having less problems. I wished, I could have early on when it comes to, users are used to those file shares, those map drives into their files that way. When we moved over with Teams, we wanted to give them some transitional steps so that way it wasn't as significant of a change. And so that's where, the OneDrive sync technology allows them to get that similar feel. It lets them see all their files local, just like their map drives. They just might not have a drive letter. In hindsight, at that time it was still evolving and maturing. So I think it was probably about the best way to do it. Today, I wouldn't necessarily do it that way. I would go more into the if the users can do their work in a OneDrive online space and work out of that, and maybe minimize the files that they have to actually do syncs on. There's I think a significant benefit there. You don't have to worry about sync issues. Sometimes there's delays if the internet, whether they're home, they're working, or things like that. Really would help if they didn't have so many syncs, and not to mention the ransomware concerns that are part of that. You getting rid of SMB is great, so you kind of minimize some of those threat avenues, but it's still there, and they could still be, taken advantage of from an attacker's perspective. But again, it's been reduced. Recoverability is much faster. But again, if we can minimize the availability of those files directly on that machine, that goes a long way. And then we also have contractors that are also users, and we've given them technology. So we provide them the technology, or a Windows virtual desktop where the controls exist as well for whether it's managing data and files. So Long answer. Sorry. A lot of
No,
different things. I'm just trying to get a lot out quick. And
yeah, no, that covered a lot of interesting points. You mentioned some of the cost savings that have come about as a result of this, which makes a lot of sense. But of course, there's often a big initial cost, initial investment that you have to get past, which often ends up delaying these sorts of projects for a long time. What did that look like in your case? Was there a significant initial investment to be made, or how did that play out?
so, like historically, like we purchase hardware, so we have those initial costs that tend to be a good spike, and those happen every 5 to 7 years, depending on how long you take your equipment. From the Azure side, and in O365, we were already E5, right? So we're inheriting solutions, we're inheriting a lot of these different things without additional cost. So that's already in place. And that's where we've moved all of our flat files and all the regular data into that. And so we get a lot accomplished there. We don't see, if anything, we're seeing cost savings, especially future cost savings, because file servers go away. No more file servers. We don't have print servers, and that sort of thing. On the Azure side, right, you got to monitor that closely, because that can easily get out of control quick if you don't watch what you're doing, as far as like building servers and remembering which ones you build, because they can build up quick. So just keeping a good handle on what you have out there. We lift and shift boxes out there. So with that, we did have some increase in cost, but I would call that more leveling out our costs annually versus those spikes every 5 years or so. And in the process, we were able to eliminate some boxes. Microsoft services handled it in some cases. We moved some things to SQL, more Microsoft app services and SQL services that are within Azure. Those have worked great from a development perspective. The costs have been less than what we would have been paying on regular servers, and other costs and compliance and everything else that would have had to go along with that. So we were seeing cost savings in some ways that way, but we did have increase when it came to just Azure spend that didn't exist before, right? But in my mind, we're paying for things now in Azure that we weren't doing before that we should have been doing. We should have, from the FISMA perspective, right? The 853 perspective. I mean, there's so many things that's being handled in that ecosystem of Azure, right? And Microsoft and the compliance that they're doing, that my data center, and frankly, I can't imagine many data centers being able to come close to doing what needs to be done. And we should have been paying for and should have been doing those things. And nowadays, goodness, you got to be doing those things. It's just not affordable, right? So moving into that environment with Microsoft has allowed us to receive those benefits, but at a much lower cost, right? We're not having to pay all those other fees. So we benefit in that way. But they're right, as far as the dollars and cents, it's going to go up to some degree for that type of spend. But it has to be recognized that those future spends that you usually see, and I know Georgia was seeing a lot of that. Georgia used to purchase all of its desktops and hardware like every 3 years or so, and so Georgia would have these huge spikes, right? And so the legislature would allocate funds for the technology authority to do those new spends, and then eventually they went to more of a leasing program and cut out the spikes, and it kind of leveled out the budget and helped with budgeting. Budgeting, right? It's always an issue. And so Azure, in a sense, kind of helps with that, but once you get in there, and you can really fine tune that. They have services and solutions and tools to help you manage those costs that you really should take advantage of. But it's just keeping somebody on it and having it as part of your compliance program within your own office to manage Azure costs or cloud costs, whatever it might be, because you could unintentionally be, spending money on stuff that you don't have to be.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's actually quite encouraging because, 20 years ago, legacy systems would have to just be replaced, like you were saying, every so often, and it would just seem like a really huge barrier to have that big budget hit all at once to have a whole scale, whole replacement of a large system. And it sounds like this, although there might be some increased initial costs, it's not at that same level. It's a much easier barrier to get past. And like you said, a lot of it, that increased cost is just because you should be doing these things anyway. So that's especially with systems that are high availability and with a lot of security concerns, that becomes even more important. I guess digging down into that a little bit on device management, you mentioned Windows Virtual Desktop. How did this change the way you do provisioning, updates? I'm assuming it made it all a little bit more uniform, but how did that change?
Yeah, so the Windows Virtual Desktop and the Surface, that's our laptop of choice, and there's reasons for that. So the Windows Virtual Desktop for us was kind of an initial stopgap, because COVID hit quick in a sense of responding, users going home and not necessarily fully being prepared. And we had we were already, prior to COVID, we already had services going out. We were already on a trajectory for this type of work, for remote work. But there was still a certain percentage that didn't get done. And there were certain services that still needed to be run from a virtual desktop because servers were still on-prem at the time. And so that virtual desktop gave that access where they were at home. They didn't have it, and we weren't going to give them a VPN. We had no VPN access. And so we used the virtual desktops for those things. But we found that, I don't know, the virtual desktops can get pricey too. And so, that cost went up a bit just because of the nature of that and the resources it requires for the users. I mean, depending too, we have power users, so they need a fair amount of resources. So that can get a little pricey. And, users seem to be most efficient on their machines. They have the full resource power. And I think there's a place for the virtual desktop. It did great. It does well. We use it for certain things, but we've moved it more for BCP and DR purposes now, because we've invested the energies and architecture around the Surface, and which was Intune, but it's now end user, Microsoft Endpoint Manager. So the user's primary workspace is their Surface laptop. And we had a couple other apps that reasons they had to come into a virtual desktop to be able to do certain communications out. But we've recently been able to get rid of that as well. So now we're using it mostly for DR, BCP purposes on the virtual desktop. But the laptops are being managed again. Intune, group policy is gone. All that's being managed through that framework. We're managing software, our patches. Oh my goodness, the controls that keep coming out from Microsoft. I mean, it's a big job to keep up with Endpoint Manager and all the different policies and solutions that are there. I mean, so far beyond group policy that was in the traditional sense. A lot of opportunity there to add additional controls and containment. I mean, there's just hundreds of options. And so we've really got that down to a science for our office. The users work really well with their machines remotely. If they were to have an issue, a machine died, they could go into Windows Virtual Desktop from another machine remotely without an issue. All their stuff is synced within the Microsoft ecosystem. So any new machine they go to, or if we had to ship them a laptop to their house, it's 5 minutes and that thing's running. When we purchase the laptops, we seed the tenant with all those laptops. So the serial number to that laptop is tied to us in our tenant. And so when it gets turned on, they can log directly into Azure Active Directory, and then immediately it takes over the machine. It pushes everything it needs to be, kind of like you would with MDM on phones. It treats the laptop the same way. And then they're working pretty quickly. 15 minutes or so. We're doing our testing for our users, other than a patch and a reboot or so, depending on where that is on the laptop when we get it. 15-30 minutes and they're working, but that's worked really well for the users. Again, virtual desktop is great, is helpful, has all the compliance. It made it easy across the board. A lot of redundancy there, in flexibility. But for the most part, we've standardized on the laptop, has made the users day-to-day, I think as less cumbersome as it can be, the happier they are in that sense, as long as we can add the security controls in there, so to the same level, which we're able to do that. That seems to work best overall.
Okay, that makes sense. So amazingly, we're at the point where we're about ready to transition over to audience Q&A. Before we do that, wanted to check, Bill, if there were any points that you wanted to be sure to bring up, anything that you feel like we haven't gotten to yet that you wanted to mention, or should we go to the Q&A?
Let's see. I'll take a quick peek just to make sure there's nothing that might be helpful. I might take 30 seconds just to spill through a few things just that may touch on someone's thoughts. We jumped in on the DLP heavily with 365 labeling and classification. We do sharing with constituents all through the team's environment, which is basically the SharePoint side. We do all of the management of permissions and rights through the Azure AD side. We don't use the team side permissions so much. It's all managed through AD. That works really well. It's really important. If you go in that space, if you haven't been there, if you're looking to go there, spend time up front deciding on your methodology on how you're going to manage files and work with those files. In offboarding, onboarding, we've worked through a lot of different things, and we've got some pretty good ways now on how we're managing that. It works well for us. So you don't want to have people all over the place and different areas, and when they offboard, making sure you keep it clean and keep them removed. So there's a lot that we've made progress in that space that's we're really excited about, that helps us day to day. We were doing direct print. Cloud print wasn't quite mature, and still we have it settled in there from a print side. So we're doing direct print, and that's been working fine. We're able to get rid of all of our phones. One thing we wouldn't do is probably buy desk phones. We did get desk phones initially here as part of the move to Teams. All of our calling is in Teams. We're able to get rid of all of the traditional phones. But once we got in Teams, even the desk phones weren't used. Basically these headsets, oh man, they're amazing. The quality, there's a lot of noise going on around me now. I'm in a data center. It's loud, and I don't know if you guys can hear it, but it does a great job of noise reduction, and great for home when you got people and kids maybe being in the roundabout, running around, and the people you're on the phone with don't hear any of it. Very stable. So we saved a lot of money on the phones too, going this route. We cut out a lot of cost, and just being generally flexible, so wherever they go.
Okay, great. So I'll start going through some of the questions that have come in on the chat, and everyone, please feel free to post other questions in chat as we go, and we'll get through as much as we can here. Let's see. Let's start with there's a question about gaps that you mentioned that had to be filled with additional third-party tools. Before we do that, Jagadish, I see your hand up. Did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we kind of stop the recording and then go for the Q&A. So, thank you.